Have you ever felt your mind hijacked by a single emotion, so quickly, so fully, that by the time you return to yourself, damage had already been done? That is the silent violence of anger. It enters not like thunder, but like a whisper disguised as righteousness. And for a split second, it feels like power, until it burns something you never meant to lose. In today's world, anger is no longer just a personal emotion. It's been industrialized. It's monetized in algorithms, weaponized in politics, dramatized in relationships. We live in an attention economy that rewards outrage and punishes stillness. So when you're angry, you're not just battling your own impulses, you're also battling the invisible hands that provoke you to perform. But intelligent people, they choose a different path. Not because they don't feel anger, they do. In fact, they feel it deeply. But what makes them different is how they navigate it. They don't deny the fire, they just don't let it burn down their house. They know that not all silence is suppression. Sometimes silence is strategy. In Stoic philosophy, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much more harmful are the consequences of anger than the circumstances that aroused it?" He wasn't advocating emotional numbness. He was teaching emotional clarity, because anger isn't weakness, it's raw energy. But left unchecked, it becomes a leash that drags you out of character and out of alignment. This video is not about bottling up your anger or pretending to be calm. It's about understanding how intelligent people channel that energy with precision. You will discover 10 deeply insightful things they avoid, not because they're trying to control everything, but because they've learned that self-command is more powerful than emotional dominance. If you've ever said something in anger that echoed longer than you intended, if you've ever felt your integrity leak through a crack in your composure, if you've ever wondered how to feel your anger without being devoured by it, then this episode is for you. Let's begin with the first thing an intelligent person avoids: the urge to speak just to win. When anger flares, the tongue often turns into a weapon. Words become arrows, not to express, but to injure. And in the heat of conflict, many feel a desperate urge to speak, not to communicate truth, but to win the moment. But intelligent people, they've learned that when you speak only to win, you usually lose something more important: your character, your clarity, your credibility. There's a cognitive distortion known as the urgency trap, that when we're angry, we believe resolution must be immediate, that silence is weakness, and that the one who speaks last somehow wins. But this is the illusion anger sells you, that domination equals dignity, that verbal victory equals emotional power, that being louder, quicker, or sharper proves something valuable. But it never does. In truth, when you try to dominate a moment with words, you create a battlefield out of what could have been a bridge. You escalate what needed de-escalation. You pour gasoline into a moment that only needed space. An intelligent person pauses and silently asks, "Am I trying to resolve this, or am I trying to win?" Because the wise know, when ego speaks, wisdom hides. They recognize that speaking out of ego creates noise, and speaking from noise makes you forget the signal. Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." The Stoic path teaches us, your reaction is your reputation. Your restraint is your strength. There's also something deeper at play. When you speak to win, you're no longer speaking as yourself. You're speaking as your anger. And the danger of that is this: anger has no long-term memory. It only lives for the next blow. But you have to live with the aftermath. So intelligent people choose to listen, even when their pride wants to respond. They choose to breathe, even when the fire rises in their throat. And when they do speak, it is not to dominate, but to deliver clarity. Because they know, if your voice becomes a sword, it will cut through more than just the argument. It will cut through trust, through dignity, through the very connection you once valued. Winning an argument is easy, Preserving the relationship while protecting your boundaries, that takes strength. So when anger rises, remember, you don't have to prove power through volume. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that waits, the one that speaks when silence has already done the heavy lifting. There's a dangerous moment that lives just milliseconds after you feel triggered, before thought, before pause, before clarity. It's the first impulse, and it almost always demands action. Slam the door, fire back the message, say something, anything, just to not feel powerless. But intelligent people, they avoid this trap because they know the first impulse is rarely the truest response. In that moment of emotional ignition, the body prepares for battle, not reflection. Cortisol floods the bloodstream, logic dims, and your nervous system screams, "Do something, right now." This is what modern psychology calls an amygdala hijack. When the primitive brain takes over and tells you that reaction equals survival. But that's not survival. That's surrender to chaos. And here's the cost. The first impulse is often the one you regret the most, because it doesn't come from intention. It comes from instinct. It's not based on the situation. It's based on your old wounds. And intelligent people have trained themselves to distinguish between the two. This is why they pause, not because they're suppressing how they feel, but because they're giving their mind time to catch up with their heart. They're not afraid to feel. They're just not willing to be ruled by the first wave of emotion. In Stoic philosophy, there's a principle called premeditatio malorum, the mental rehearsal of difficulty before it arrives. Stoics train for storms before the sky darkens. Likewise, the intelligent practice stillness before anger comes, so when it does, they don't panic, they observe. They understand that power isn't in the immediate reaction, but in the delayed wisdom. The longer they can stretch the gap between stimulus and response, the more freedom they have. Because in that pause lives the space to ask, is this me or just the old version of me reacting again? Am I trying to be heard or am I trying to be right? Will this moment define me or refine me? This isn't about being robotic. It's about being sovereign. You still feel the wave. You just no longer let it drown you. The intelligent don't avoid emotions. They study them. They don't suppress fire. They contain it until it can warm, not destroy. So when you feel that impulse rise, stop, breathe, don't move. And in that pause, reclaim yourself. Because whoever commands that pause commands the outcome. There's something deceptively seductive about writing when angry. It feels safe, controlled, even justified. You're not shouting. You're not lashing out in person. You're just typing, just expressing. But here's the truth. Intelligent people don't confuse expression with liberation. And that's why they avoid writing while angry. When emotions flare, the mind looks for outlets. In a digital age, the keyboard becomes the battlefield. Texts, emails, comment sections, all feel like arenas where you can say what you really feel. But what you feel in that moment isn't always real. It's reactive, it's raw, it's rarely refined. Writing while angry is like trying to paint a masterpiece during an earthquake. The lines don't land where you intend. The color bleeds. The structure collapses under the weight of urgency. What feels like clarity in the moment often reads as chaos in hindsight. Intelligent people understand that writing is permanent, and anger, by nature, is temporary. But when you combine the two, you create a legacy for a moment that never deserved one. They know the brain under rage doesn't write with wisdom, it writes with fire, and fire uncontained doesn't illuminate, it scorches. In Stoic thought, Seneca warned that the greatest remedy for anger is delay, not silence, not suppression, just space, because it's in space that perspective is born. The intelligent don't delete messages after sending them. They delete them before typing begins. And when they do write, they wait. They let the emotions settle like silt in water. They revisit the intention behind the message. They ask, am I trying to communicate or to unload? Will this create peace or just transfer my chaos into someone else's inbox? Will this sentence bring me closer to who I want to be or drag me back into who I'm trying to outgrow? Because they know angry words live longer than angry feelings. Screenshots survive apologies, and tone, once misread, rarely gets rewritten. Instead of texting in rage, they draft in silence. Instead of venting in paragraphs, they journal in private. Instead of posting, they pause. This isn't about censorship, it's about discipline, not of your voice, but of your timing. So next time your fingers race to say what your chest is burning to release, don't. Let the words wait. Let the moment breathe. Because what's written in fury may win a reaction, but what's written in wisdom earns respect. There's a subtle kind of violence that doesn't come from shouting or swearing. It comes from certainty, from words like, you always do this, or you never listen. These aren't just phrases, they're emotional verdicts. And intelligent people avoid them, especially when angry, because they understand how easily language can become a prison. In moments of tension, the brain craves simplicity. It wants to label, to judge, to find patterns, even when they don't exist. Always and never offer the illusion of control. They wrap complex emotions into neat, absolute packages. But what they really do is erase nuance. When you say, you always disappoint me, you're not describing a moment. You're rewriting history. You're saying, every version of you has failed me. That's not feedback, that's exile. Intelligent people know that these absolutist phrases aren't just inaccurate, they're damaging because they shift the conversation from behavior to identity. They don't correct, they condemn. In psychology, this is called global labeling, reducing a person to a single trait or mistake. And once labeled, people stop listening. They start defending. Dialogue dies, and all that remains is a war of definitions. From a Stoic lens, clarity matters more than catharsis. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, if someone does wrong, teach them gently and show them their error, not with accusation, but with reason. That's why intelligent people choose words that leave space, not walls. Instead of saying, you never support me, they might say, in this moment, I didn't feel supported. Notice the shift. It's not about defining the other person. It's about revealing an experience. It invites connection, not conflict. The truth is, always and never aren't tools for truth. They're weapons for control. And most of the time, we use them not to be understood, but to win. But as we've already seen, winning with words often means losing something deeper. So intelligent people trade absolutism for accuracy. They slow down their language. They speak from the present, not the past. They refuse to trap others or themselves in fixed emotional narratives. Because they know when you exaggerate pain into permanence, you create a version of reality that's harder to heal from. You don't just damage the relationship, you distort it. Next time anger tempts you to say always or never, pause. Ask yourself, is this true or just how I feel right now? Am I describing what happened or trying to punish them with language? The more conscious your words become, the less damage they'll do. And in that restraint, there is a quiet kind of respect. Anger has many masks, but one of the most deceptive is pride. So often, what we call anger is really a bruised ego in disguise, an old wound dressed up as moral outrage. And this is precisely why intelligent people avoid defending the ego when they're angry. They know the cost of protecting a temporary identity with permanent consequences. In heated moments, the ego whispers dangerous things. You're being disrespected. You need to prove you're right. You can't let them think they've won. These thoughts don't come from truth. They come from insecurity dressed as strength. And if you react from that space, you'll fight not for resolution, but for validation. But intelligent people, they've trained themselves to recognize the difference between injury and insult. They ask, am I hurt or just offended? Is this about the truth or just about my need to be seen as strong? Because they understand, the louder the ego, the quieter the wisdom. In Stoic thought, the ego is a dangerous illusion. Epictetus reminds us, it's not the things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. And the ego's judgment is almost always personal. It makes everything about you, not the situation, not the solution, just you. This is why defending the ego leads to escalation. You're no longer in conversation, you're in self-preservation mode. The goal shifts from understanding to self-image management. And that's a battlefield where no one truly wins. Intelligent people don't avoid anger. They avoid identifying with it. They don't let a momentary insult rewrite their worth. They know that someone else's disrespect is not a debt they have to repay with reaction. Instead, they remain rooted, grounded. They respond from their core, not their surface. They also know that ego-driven anger narrows perception. It makes you see enemies where there are misunderstandings. It turns feedback into attacks. It confuses disagreement with betrayal. But the wise know, not every pushback is a threat. Not every silence is rejection. And not every correction is criticism. When you let go of the need to defend your ego, you gain something far more powerful: clarity. You can hear what's being said, not just how it makes you feel. You can ask real questions instead of making assumptions. You can stay connected even when challenged. So the next time you feel your pride rise like armor, stop. Ask yourself, what am I really protecting? And if the answer is your ego, maybe it's time to set it down. Because nothing strong ever needs to shout to prove its strength. Anger has a way of making everything feel urgent. It distorts time. What could have waited an hour suddenly demands resolution in seconds. What was once a small offense now feels like a full betrayal. And in that distorted emotional state, many rush into decisions, quitting a job, ending a relationship, sending the final message. But intelligent people avoid this trap. They understand a decision made in chaos rarely leads to clarity. When you're angry, your nervous system is not calibrated for logic. It's calibrated for survival. Your brain releases cortisol, narrows your vision, and demands action. This is biology's way of protecting you from immediate threats. But in modern life, most of our threats are not tigers. They're texts, words, tones, silences. And yet we still react like we're under siege. Quick decisions in anger are not rooted in values. They're rooted in vengeance. They're not about what's best long-term. They're about satisfying the short-term itch to regain control. But that control is fragile, and the cost is often irreversible. Stoic thinkers understood this well. Seneca wrote, "The greatest remedy for anger is delay, not avoidance, not suppression, just space, because space allows the emotional storm to pass. And once the water's calm, you can finally see what's true." Intelligent people use that space strategically. They don't deny the urgency they feel. They just don't trust it. They ask, is this decision aligned with who I want to be, or just who I am in this moment? They know the difference between emotional relief and true resolution. It's not a weakness to wait, it's mastery. To sit in discomfort without reacting is to reclaim authorship over your story. Because once a decision is made, it begins a domino effect, and angry choices tend to set fires instead of building bridges. Imagine trying to navigate through a city during a blackout. That's what angry decision-making looks like. You might move fast, but you'll crash more often. Intelligent people would rather pause in the dark than rush blindly into a wall. This doesn't mean they're indecisive. It means they're intentional. They know that the world might pressure them to react, but wisdom invites them to respond. So the next time you feel the heat rise and a decision clawing at your throat, wait, walk, breathe, write, do anything but decide. And when you return to yourself, not the angry version, but the whole one, you'll know what to do. Because in the end, intelligent people don't fear making hard decisions. They simply refuse to make them while on fire. There's a moment after the anger fades when silence returns, but peace does not. The fire is out, yet the mind keeps circling the ashes, replaying the words, reimagining the scene, rebuilding the pain. It's the habit of mentally rehearsing the story of what hurt you. And intelligent people, they avoid this, not because the pain isn't real, but because they know that repetition doesn't heal, it hardens. When you rehearse the pain story, your mind turns the past into a performance. You become both audience and actor in a loop of suffering. You narrate what they said, how they said it, what you should have said back. And with every retelling, the wound deepens, not because it's reopened, but because it never had space to close. This cycle feels productive. It feels like you're processing. But what you're really doing is cementing. You're turning a temporary moment into a permanent identity. The one who was wronged, the one who wasn't heard, the one who was betrayed. Intelligent people interrupt that cycle. They notice when their thoughts are no longer seeking clarity, but clinging to control. When the story becomes less about truth and more about punishment. When the narrative starts building villains instead of boundaries. From a Stoic perspective, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed." That's not denial. That's authorship. It's the choice to process reality without becoming possessed by it. So instead of rehearsing the pain, the intelligent reflect on it. They ask, what was mine to own? What was theirs to carry? What can I learn without re-bleeding every time I remember? They understand that holding on to a pain story isn't protection. It's self-sabotage disguised as self-care. It gives the illusion of power, but robs you of presence. It becomes a shield made of glass, reflecting everything, but protecting nothing. Instead, they choose to metabolize the emotion, not relive it. They journal for insight, not revenge. They speak to be free, not to be right. They process, then release. Because they know the story you rehearse becomes the identity you reinforce. And if you rehearse pain too long, it becomes a script that you live by, even in relationships that had nothing to do with the original wound. So when the mind starts replaying the pain like a favorite song, pause, mute it. Ask if this repetition is making you stronger or just keeping you stuck. The most intelligent response to pain isn't performance, it's peace. In an age where everything is broadcasted, anger has become a spectacle. Social media rants, public confrontations, passive-aggressive posts dressed as authenticity. We've been taught that if you're not loud about your feelings, you're not real. But intelligent people resist this trap. They avoid public displays of fury, not because they lack passion, but because they understand that what's loud is not always what's strong. When you display rage publicly, the message gets lost in the theater. The reaction becomes entertainment. And the people watching aren't asking, "Are you okay?" They're asking, "What's next?" In that moment, your anger is no longer yours. It becomes content for others to judge, dissect, or ignore. Fury, when externalized without discernment, turns dignity into drama, and drama demands escalation. What begins as a valid frustration spirals into performance. Now you're not just angry, you're acting angry, feeding off attention, chasing the validation of visibility. Intelligent people know that true power doesn't need an audience, that privacy is not weakness, it's wisdom. They've realized that protecting their emotional process from the noise of others preserves their clarity. Because once your pain is public, it becomes harder to understand what's yours and what's been shaped by other people's opinions. Stoic philosophy holds restraint as a virtue. Seneca wrote, "Anger, if not restrained, is frequently more hurtful to us than the injury that provokes it." A public outburst may feel like justice, but it often breeds more harm than healing. It doesn't restore respect, it diminishes it. There's also another danger. Public rage often invites private shame. What feels righteous in the moment can echo with regret the next morning. Screenshots live forever. Reputations are built slowly and shattered in seconds. And intelligent people value their peace over performative release. Instead of shouting in public, they speak in private. Instead of venting to the world, they confide in the few. They choose precision over spectacle, depth over display, because they understand not everything that burns needs to be seen. Some fires are meant to be tended quietly, not thrown into the wind for show. So when the urge comes to lash out online, to teach someone a lesson in front of others, pause. Ask, is this about truth or about optics? Will this bring clarity or just create more noise? The intelligent don't avoid their fury. They contain it, they direct it, they transmute it. Because in a world obsessed with reaction, restraint is rebellion. And when you master that, your silence becomes more commanding than another scream. Anger has a dangerous trick. It makes you forget the other person is human. In the heat of conflict, we reduce people to labels: narcissist, coward, manipulator, monster. And suddenly they're no longer someone we once trusted or even loved. They become an enemy to defeat. But intelligent people, they resist this dehumanization because they understand the moment you strip someone of their humanity, you lose a part of your own. Dehumanizing is seductive because it simplifies pain. It allows you to skip the discomfort of nuance. If the other person is purely bad, then your anger feels purely justified. No ambiguity, no accountability, just a clean emotional narrative. But that narrative is a lie. In truth, even the people who hurt us are still layered, flawed, complex. They may be immature, reactive, unhealed, but they're still people. And intelligent individuals refuse to let pain turn them into judges with no mercy. This doesn't mean excusing toxic behavior. It means seeing without distortion. Stoicism is not passive, it is precise. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following question: what fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize?" This question doesn't weaken your boundary. It sharpens your humility. Intelligent people remember that in their worst moments, they've also failed. They've also said things they didn't mean. They've also let anger speak before the truth had a chance. That memory keeps them grounded, compassionate, clear. Because when you dehumanize the other, you give yourself permission to act without conscience. You justify cruelty. You harden into vengeance. And in the end, it's not the other person who suffers most. It's you. You become brittle, suspicious, paranoid, and worse, you carry that same armor into every new connection, expecting the worst, preparing to attack, forgetting how to trust. The intelligent know boundaries don't require demonization. You can walk away without hatred. You can protect yourself without vilifying them. You can say, "This dynamic no longer serves me," instead of "they're evil and I hope they suffer." Because the goal isn't to win, the goal is to remain intact. So next time anger tempts you to reduce someone to a headline, a label, a caricature, pause. Remember, how you see them shapes who you become. Even in betrayal, hold on to your integrity. Even in disappointment, hold on to your depth. Even in hurt, hold on to your humanity. That's not a weakness. That's strength in its highest form. After the fire fades and the room is quiet again, there's a different kind of pain that arrives. Not from what was done to you, but from what you did in return. The sharp edge of regret, the silent echo of things said too harshly, of actions that don't align with who you believe yourself to be. And this is where many people get trapped, not in anger, but in shame. But intelligent people, they don't fall into that spiral. They avoid shaming themselves after anger because they understand shame is not accountability. It's self-destruction disguised as reflection. There's a difference between owning your actions and erasing your worth, between saying, I could have handled that better, and I'm a terrible person. The first invites growth. The second chains you to the past. Intelligent people choose the first. They recognize that anger, while powerful, is also deeply human. It exposes wounds, it presses against identity, it reveals where we're still learning, and because of that, they treat their angry moments not as proof of failure, but as mirrors. Mirrors that reflect what still needs healing, what still needs attention, what still needs compassion. Stoic philosophy is clear. We are not the sum of our worst moments. Epictetus reminds us, it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. That includes how we judge ourselves. Shame whispers that we should have been perfect. Wisdom reminds us we're still in progress. Intelligent people don't pretend they got everything right, but they also don't replay their mistakes like a punishment loop. Instead, they extract the lesson, extend self-forgiveness, and commit to doing better. Not louder, not harsher, just better. They journal the insight, not the insult. They hold themselves accountable, not hostage, because they know that shame rarely leads to transformation. It leads to self-withdrawal, to emotional isolation, to a shrinking of spirit. And the world doesn't need more people who hide from themselves. It needs people who rise after reflection. So if you've ever woken up with the weight of your own voice echoing in your chest, if you've ever felt that ache of, why did I say that? Or, that wasn't me. Let that moment be a turning point, not a tombstone. You are not the version of you that showed up at your lowest. You are the one who's still here, listening, learning, and willing to grow. And that's what makes you intelligent. Because the truly wise don't just master how they express anger, they master how they respond to themselves after the storm has passed. So here we are. 10 ways an intelligent person navigates anger, not by suppressing it, but by mastering it. Not by pretending they're immune to rage, but by choosing not to be ruled by it. Because in the end, the measure of intelligence isn't in how much you know. It's in how you respond when your emotions try to hijack your integrity. Anger will always be part of the human experience. It visits the wise and the reckless alike. But where the reckless explode, the wise examine. Where the ego defends, the intelligent observe. And where the world demands instant reaction, the stoic-minded pause, breathe, and respond with intention. Marcus Aurelius didn't write about the absence of anger. He wrote about the discipline required to face it without losing your soul. You have power over your mind, he said, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And that is the core of everything we've explored in this episode. Strength is not the volume of your voice, it's the stillness behind your words. It's not how quickly you strike, it's how consciously you choose. It's not about proving you're right, it's about preserving what's right within you. Because you can't undo what anger made you do. But you can decide who you will be the next time it visits. And that decision, that quiet, powerful internal shift, is what separates those who live on impulse from those who live on purpose. You don't have to fear your anger. You only have to fear what happens when you let it define you. When you hand it the steering wheel and say, take me wherever you want. Intelligent people don't do that. They sit in the fire, feel the heat, and still choose their direction. They remember that not every battle is worth fighting. Not every comment deserves a reply. Not every emotion needs to be expressed in its rawest form. Sometimes the most stoic thing you can do is smile gently at your own reaction and not follow it. And if you've watched this far, then something in you is already practicing this wisdom. Maybe quietly, maybe imperfectly, but consistently. And that's what matters. So as you move forward, carry this truth. You are not weak for feeling anger. You are wise when you respond with clarity. You are not broken because you faltered. You are becoming sharper, calmer, more centered. You are becoming someone who doesn't just talk about self-mastery, but lives it. And that is a quiet revolution the world desperately needs. If this message spoke to something in you, if you recognized even one moment in your life where anger tried to hijack your clarity, then you already know how powerful this awareness can be. But knowing is only the beginning. Mastery requires practice, repetition, reflection. So here's your invitation. The next time you feel that familiar fire rising, pause. Recall one insight from this video, one truth that grounded you. Then breathe, observe, choose. That's how you build emotional intelligence. Not in theory, but in the heat of real life. And if you found value here, I'd love to hear your voice in the comments. Share which part hit home the most. Or tell us, what's one thing you've learned to avoid when anger comes knocking? Your story could be the spark that lights clarity for someone else. And if you're on a journey to sharpen your mind, guard your peace, and live with quiet strength, then you're exactly where you need to be. This is Stoic Viva, and we're just getting started. So subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who needs this wisdom. And if you're ready to go deeper, I invite you to watch the next video in this series. It just might change the way you see yourself forever. Because intelligence isn't loud. It's practiced in silence, honed in discomfort, and revealed in the moment you choose not to react.